Hello, everyone. My name is Fas Mosley. I work for Certrec. I head up marketing and sales, and I also run the strategic alliances and strategic marketing part of our organization. And I have spent a couple of decades in cybersecurity and software as an executive, working for IBM, Hewlett-Packard, a number of other companies. And I also helped Hewlett-Packard start their information security business. And that really gave me a lot of exposure to a lot of enterprise problems, including at utilities, power plants, and a host of companies. So I'm hoping that you can see this presentation. It's also being recorded for anyone who wants to view this webinar again. So I think we can probably begin. And there will be questions and answers at the end. So let me start by saying that very pleased to have you here. This presentation is as a result of a lot of work that we've done in market research and also understanding what customers' issues have been over the few years. So let's go to slide number 2. I just want to give a quick intro to Certrec. Certrec is a company that's been around for over 30 years. Our mission has been to help utilities be more reliable and secure for a better, safer grid and bulk electric supply. How we do that is SaaS applications and technologies to reduce the risk of non-compliance, for example, NERC non-compliance for the utilities. So just to give you an example again, these are kinds of customers that we've got. What vast range of customers in the hundreds. We actually manage the NERC compliance program for about 60 companies right now. And all of the nuclear power plants in the United States have had their regulatory compliance work augmented or helped in some way by Certrec over the years. We essentially cover 3 areas. In the yellow, there's compliance and regulatory. In the blue, it's digitization, and then it's cybersecurity. And its compliance is really software and services. Digitization is software, services, and other alliance products. And cybersecurity is services, where we use the best of breed software from our partners. Just letting you know, as you joined this conference call, that we are recording this particular presentation. Okay, so let's keep going. So we're going to cover a few things here. We're going to cover the security landscape and then look at why power plants themselves are vulnerable. We'll discuss some critical infrastructure attacks, examples of what's gone wrong as well, right after that, with some real examples in utilities. And then some actions that you can take, some steps that you can take. And we're going to try to keep this presentation. It's going to be a little bit of a mix, right? It's going to be some research and some data that you can take action on, and then some examples of what actions you should really be taking. Okay, so let's look at the security landscape. This is very interesting landscape. Over the last few years, cyber threats have been getting worse and worse for everyone, actually. I want to draw your attention to number 1 here. Moody's says that the riskiest area right now, the riskiest sector right now, is electric, gas, and water utilities, as well as hospitals. This is for cyber attacks. And they think that $22 trillion of global rated debt has high or very high cyber risk exposure, which is what they're basically seeing for the electric, gas, water utility, and hospital space. Number 2, there's an example of a ransomware attack. So Hartnell College was struck by a ransomware attack. These colleges, these little colleges, medium-sized colleges are being hit by ransomware attacks. Imagine if they're being hit, then medium, large utilities, they're like juicy targets for these guys. And then number three, a month after a cyber attack, a small Colorado utility still doesn't have all its systems back online. You can check out any of these when you get a copy of this presentation, but there's a lot of information out there about this happening on a regular basis. Let's look at a little bit of data from a survey that was done of 500 utility professionals in 2021. 500 of these professionals felt like the number one concern they had was physical and or cyber grid security. So this is an important thing because it's a perception internally as well in the industry that this is an issue, and that's important because that means they understand their environment pretty well, and if they're thinking it's not a good situation, then it's likely that it's not a good situation. Here is some more data points. This is from Siemens. Siemens, actually the quote up here says, clearly the threat isn't on the horizon, it's already on the doorstep. And 54% of global utilities surveyed expect an OT attack, operational technology attack, within the next 12 months. This is Siemens. And only 42% of these surveyed rated their own readiness and response to cyber attacks as high. That's not very much confidence. On the right-hand side here, there was a survey done by West Monroe. 67% of utility leaders cited cybersecurity as their top concern of their converged IT and OT network. And so this is something that's being, is shown throughout, essentially. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And I just want to remind everybody that we are recording this particular presentation. Okay, so next slide. So this is information gleaned from Cisco, and it talks about some of the increased occurrences of cyber attacks. In the top left here, the red circle here, it shows you that $6 trillion was the cybercrime cost in 2021, and is projected to be $10.5 trillion in 2025. So that's an increase of 70% in just 4 years. On the right-hand side here, we have, I don't know if I can hear some noise on the background. Please mute your microphones. On the right-hand side here, in 2021, the ransomware attack frequency was every 11 seconds for a consumer or a business. It is now projected to be 5 times that in 2031, at every 2 seconds. And this is sourced from Cisco. So there's a lot going on, there's a lot of changes happening, and much of it is quite risky. This is from Gartner Group. Gartner is a very well-known, very large, probably the top analyst firm in the IT sector. And here are the top trends that they believe are happening. And I've just highlighted 3 of those for us that apply to utilities and power plants and power generators. So the first one, 01, is attack surface expansion. All of you probably know that more and more people are doing remote work. More of the applications being accessed are from the public cloud, or people are putting their applications on the public cloud. And the supply chains are getting more and more connected. So everything is kind of coming together and connecting. Trend number two is this thing they've called it identity system defense. This is the misuse of credentials. So passwords is a primary method of breaking in and doing cyber attacks. And then trend number 7 is very relevant to us. And this is the piece about the culture and the education. And it's not just good enough for people to be aware that there's an issue, but they really need to have a change in culture. And also, there are new ways of training your staff. Like, for example, I was talking to a provider just a few weeks ago. Games can be used to train your teams to be better and to basically not make the mistakes that let in intruders. So this is a summary kind of the of some of the research, and the last piece here actually is The top focus areas for energy and utility cyber leaders, and this is from PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2022, and they say that their number one challenge is improved confidence of leaders in their ability to manage threats. Number two, a faster response time to incidents and disruptions. And number three, increased prevention of successful attacks. So you can see that in all the surveys and all the research that's being done, it's all pointing to kind of some of the similar conclusions. So let's look a little bit now at the landscape and who are the threat actors out there. So the threat actors can be divided up into two groups. One is nations, and some of the nations are listed on the left here. I think you can probably figure out who they are. I'll kind of list them in a second. And then on the number two group is cyber criminals, and cyber criminals are doing it mostly for money, possibly for fame, and maybe sometimes for fun. Nations, on the other hand, are doing it to create havoc. They're doing it to attack, have a war, and be aggressive against another nation and damage them in some way. So the countries here are Russia, top left, China, and North Korea and Iran. These tend to be the most threatening top threat actors that have been identified to date. And I'm going to give you just a quick example. We talked a little bit about this previously, but if you look at this piece of news here, 3 Iranian nationals indicted in hacking and ransomware scheme. It just gives you, evidence of what I just said. This is happening. It's happening right now. Okay, so how do they do it? So there are various methods, but I'm going to give you one example. Basically malware, malicious software, and 4 different types of ways of doing it. One is a Trojan. A legitimate looking code or software is disguised. A bad piece of software is disguised as a legitimate piece of code. A worm can be introduced in many ways into the system. A worm can replicate and spread itself. It's pretty clever that way, the way it's designed. A virus usually needs a human being to deploy it. And the last one, which is used a lot and very effectively, depends upon people trusting who the email is from and then clicking on a link. And smishing is just an SMS version of that. Phishing is typically emails. So I want to give a little bit of a deeper dive on phishing, because that tends to be a very major one that criminals are using and nation threat actors are using to get in to systems, and particularly for utilities. So this one is an example. It's a real example. It looks like it's coming from Microsoft, from Outlook. All the Hotmail customers have been upgraded. Your Hotmail account has expired. Follow this link. Please reactivate your account to Outlook. And hey, that looks like a reasonable account. Live.com. Live is used by Microsoft. But of course, there might be a hidden hyperlink in there, right? So this is an example of using your trust in Outlook and Microsoft as a weapon against somebody working in a utility, for example, and then clicking on this kind of phishing email. Another example is from a bank. Kind of looks like it's from Wells Fargo. Again, you can log in, as they tell you in number 3 here. You can log into wellsfargo.com, online banking, updating. Go ahead, do that. No, don't do that. There's a hyperlink behind that. That's very, very bad hyperlink. So definitely not something to do. Okay, so these are 2 examples. And then I want to just tell you what can be done. This is the tips part of the presentation, okay? Very simple. If this is applied in for all the people who see these kinds of emails, then your incidents will go down dramatically. The first one is, do not click on any link until you've reviewed the email very carefully, taking note of the sender and the sender's domain. Is this real? Check it very carefully. Check the source and the domain. Also, ask yourself, how likely is it that so-and-so would have asked me to do this? I had a very interesting email come to me at about 11 o'clock at night. This was a few weeks ago, from my CEO, Ted Enos. And I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, why is Ted sending me an email at that time in the night? And then, of course, after doing a little bit of research, luckily I was already kind of culture trained. I was able to determine this is very fishy and this is not from Ted. So the thing to do when you get that kind of an email is, at the slightest suspicion, you should contact the sender, actually, but don't do it via the email. You do not reply to that email. Use a phone or text or some other system to validate it. And ensure, of course, that your virus email scanning programs are all up to date. So the point here is really, please don't get caught. And this is some basic training that if it's done in this way specifically, it can really make a difference. Okay, so let's look now at why we think power plants are vulnerable. And obviously, a cybersecurity attack on the energy sector is a massive way to attack public safety, our economy, and the environment potentially. And after studying what's happening in the ecosystem essentially, and looking at what customers have been experiencing, and particularly what's going on with the utilities and power generators, we have come up with something very simple, and we have called it MARS. MARS is just an acronym that is a simple one for anyone to learn, and it's a summary of why power plants are potentially vulnerable today to cyber threat and cyber attacks. So the M stands for the merging of the operational and the IT networks, operation technologies and IT networks. The A stands for authentication weaknesses. You might remember this has been raised by Gartner and other people as well in the previous research that we cited. R is remote access is on the increase. Okay, that's another danger. It's again been mentioned by several pieces of research and what we've seen with customers. And then S is for slow installation of security updates, because that's the prime way for threats to get through. So let's look a little bit deeper. If you have been around for the last 10 years in the utility sector, you will know that the merging of OT and IT has been going on for a long time. And today it's closer than ever before. On the right-hand side, you have the OT network here, which are a bunch of analog, isolated, discrete systems, right? And they're unconnected typically. But being unconnected is hard for someone to kind of come in, get access to, let's say, your surveillance network, your CCTV network, and then do something with it and affect the other systems. On the left-hand side is the opposite, right? Because the left-hand side is the IT environment, which is all digital, it's all connected, it can be global. And once you get into one part of the network, let's say through an IoT device or through a smartphone down here or through the cloud, you can get into maybe any of the systems. And as these start getting connected, the threat is coming from this side to this side. And that's the whole part about merging of OT and IT networks. So that's a major thing to take away in MARS, M, merging of OT and IT. Let's look at the second one, authentication weaknesses. So this is all about network accessible devices with weak or default passwords can serve as gateways to more critical systems. And this is something that's happening all the time. A default password is the worst thing possible. I know everybody recognizes that, but does everybody really follow it? And that's the part, that's the difficult part for a utility. Let's look at R. Remote access being on the increase. This example here, there's lots of IoT devices, remote access going on through VPNs, virtual private networks, through smartphones. People are working from home. Yes, it's on the increase. Let's look at slow installation. I hope very much that this is not somebody's IT room, because if it was, then it would indicate that you don't have enough resources, or they're disorganized and they are not going to be doing updates on security patches and software in a timely way. That is what the criminals are waiting for. That is what the threat actors, nation threat actors are waiting for. So this is important. So MARS, M-A-R-S. And then we also looked at McKinsey's research on this. So McKinsey kind of summarized that electric utilities can be affected by cyber attacks across the whole value chain, all the way from the left-hand side, which is generation, through transmission, through distribution, and the network itself. And typically the kinds of disruptions or implications of the threats are written here. So disruption of service, ransomware attacks, in transmission, again, disruption of power to customers, again, in distribution, disruption of substations, leading to regional loss of services. And then in the network, and this is the important one to realize, access to customer information, their names, their credit cards, those kinds of things, any kind of fraud, and of course, disruption of services as well. So this really, as I said before, the research is all pointing to some of these areas, and this is a nice summary across the value chain. So let's do a quick deep dive. Let's look at passwords for a second. So weak passwords and password sharing can raise the risk of security breaches and damages. Obviously, the policy in your company must be, or the organization must be, passwords cannot be shared or displayed publicly, no default or weak passwords. If the system has been compromised, change the passwords immediately. But how is it enforced? If it is not enforced using a solution like a password policy enforcement system, then you're probably missing a trick there, because that system will really keep things on track. So this is, again, from our experience, that is a system that actually helps enormously. I don't know if your utility has a system like that in play or not, but it's worth finding out. Okay, a good password must be a certain length. This is from Sophos, famous IT security company. It could be a phrase, not a single word, could contain a mix of different characters, lowercase, uppercase, punctuation, and not based on personal information. Long, complex, hard to guess. Again, how do you make sure that happens? Password policy enforcement is how you make sure. And the standard systems on Microsoft are not good enough to do that. They'll do it to some extent, but they won't be good enough. Okay, so now this brings us to the part of the presentation where we're going to look a little bit at examples. So the first examples I want to share with you are critical infrastructure examples. And critical infrastructure, this is a famous one, Nord Stream, disruption of the Nord Stream supply. It's caused economic havoc, and this was obviously a physical attack. But let's look at some cyber attacks as well. So the first one I want to mention is SolarWinds. I don't know how many people are aware of this company, SolarWinds, but it's a very in-use product. It manages networks, and it is distributed to like 499 of the top Fortune 500 companies in the world today, and they have 320,000 customers. 320,000 customers. Recently, actually, 100 companies, 100 customers were compromised by Russians, including Microsoft, Intel, and Cisco, because the latest build, the Orion build of SolarWinds, had been compromised and had a backdoor installed in it. And as those Orion updates were installed by these customers, they were open to attack. Even government agencies, the US Treasury, Justice and Energy departments, and the Pentagon were affected, because this is an amazing piece of software, right? It's everywhere, network management. Here was the responsible nation. Another example, the Colonial pipeline. You probably remember this happened not very long ago. 5,500 miles of pipeline, from Texas all the way up to the Northeast. Damaged, not damaged, but basically attacked. The network was attacked to an exposed password for a VPN account. The actual pipeline wasn't damaged itself, but the threat was that damages could happen, and so it stopped the pipeline for a while. And there was a password that was compromised in a prior breach. So that's an example in the US. The SolarWinds is an example of kind of a global one, but definitely US as well. A lot of US companies were affected. And then I want to give you one that's not in the US, but it's actually very apropos because it's focused on power outages, right? It's an attack that happened in Ukraine as part of the Russian-Ukraine kind of war that was going on. In 2015, their grid was hacked, and the power outages lasted for up to 6 hours, with 230,000 consumers affected. And the interesting thing is, again, this was a Russian attack, and they the threat actors were flooding the customer services phone lines so that people couldn't even call to say that this attack had happened, or that their systems were down, or their part of the network was out. They couldn't do that. This is called a denial of service attack, essentially. So, combination of things there to make things really difficult. So what happened after this? So we identified the people who are responsible. They're wanted by the FBI. They're called sandworm hackers, and they use all the sandworm software or malware. They use Caddy Wiper, etc. And this really caused the issue. And so they're on the hot list there of the FBI. Okay, so continuing with the examples theme, let's look at some smaller utility type examples. I need to move fairly quickly because I'm losing time here. But basically, this is an example of a USB drive that was found in a parking lot. Person picked it up, brought it in, and connected it to the network. There are things such as worms we discussed. Stuxnet is a worm that was designed to target nuclear capabilities of Iran, for example. It spreads by USBs. And people know, the creators know it'll get plugged into the power plant environment. So how do you deal with this? You deal with this, the solution is that the culture needs to be changed. Always be suspicious, train employees not to bring in foreign items, no USB drives allowed, implement the strong rules and procedures. So that's an example of what you would have to do to prevent this. Here's another real example of what went wrong. This was a breach of physical security. A car literally crashed in, broke the fences, got in, and actually ended up crashing into the data center room of the power plant in this case. So this is actually a real example, and we discussed, with the entity, their NERC CIP protection, their plan, etc. The point is that physical security is another one that needs to be looked at, and so the solutions for this could be surveillance cameras, possibly with AI, and we've seen those installed in number of customers and people in the industry. Strengthening the perimeter. We're actually talking to a partner who, that's what they do. They harden the environment physically. A breach alert system can be set up, and leverage multi-layer security. So there are various ways of tackling this kind of an issue. Let me show you another example. This one was one of a disgruntled employee. In this particular case, for some reason, this employee became unhappy, and then they used their access and their privileges to actually enter into a control room environment. And of course, that resulted in real issues with blackouts. So how does one deal with something like that? Again, these are not meant to be exhaustive solutions, but there's a range of things that can be done. Surveillance can be deployed with AI-based image recognition warning systems. Cyberlocks can be leveraged. Cyberlocks, actually, Cyberlock is a company that we've talked to, and that provides this extra bit of security. And then if somebody had recognized that this person was unhappy, that could have been escalated through a particular procedure, and that could have resulted in basically putting this problem or stopping this problem from happening. Okay, so let's now look at actions that can be taken, the steps that can be taken possibly to prevent some of these threats from taking over. So some of the things that we have learned here in this presentation, the blue ones here, blue boxes, are the trends. Nation threat actors are capable, they're motivated, cyber attacks are on the rise, ransomware is basically data kidnapping. They'll take data, won't release it. And it's not a matter of if, but when. These are the trends. So what's important to address some of the challenges are basic cybersecurity practices like strong passwords and MFA, multi-factor authentication. So that's when you're using more than one factor. One factor might be password. Another factor might be something that you have, like a device. Another one might be something that you are. So, three-factor authentication, for example, what you know, what you have, what you are. Patching devices and software constantly. This is a constant theme. Breaches happen all the time, this weakness. Training and awareness, social engineering, culture. If it's not the right kind of culture and the right procedures are not set up in place, you're asking for it. And then strengthening perimeters as well. Okay, so I'm going to make this a little bit next slide. We're going to just talk a little bit about stopping the invaders. Top left, 4 bullets. Strong passwords and policy enforcement. So we're taking all this information that we've looked at, and then we're saying, so what does that mean for us? What can we do? Deploying multi-factor authentication, changing employee behaviors, and then enhancing physical security and surveillance. That'll stop, or hopefully start stopping the invaders. Enhancing or augmenting IT and addressing internal issues. I mean, we talked about, IT not updating software, etc., on time can be an internal issue. And so the list of proactive behaviors from an IT OT standpoint contains some, right? Frequent and protected backups, access control integrated with authentication and authorization, operational technology oversight with OT and IT linkage points being looked at and scanned very carefully, identifying the single points of failure there, encryption across not just servers and clients, but across the network as well, video surveillance with embedded IP, video analytics and motion detection, and then penetration testing, physical, cyber across OT and some of the kinds of that then get the net of tacticalness. And we can actually go down to solutions that would be appropriate to consider. So again, this is not advertising or promoting some of our partners here, but we're just mentioning these because these have been known to work and they are cost effective and they are very good. That's why we're discussing them. So the first step that any of us should take is look at the cybersecurity risk plan. And this goes across physical, data, and operational technology. And then look at PPE, password policy enforcement solutions. For example, Netrix, you can go on the website and have a look at what they have. They can give you all kinds of solutions. MFA, multi-factor authentication, like Okta, for example, or Duo. Security information and event management tools like Tripwire. We actually think that's a pretty good one. SOC monitoring, security operations center monitoring, training the staff, and understanding what the gaps are in OT, IT, and physical security, gap analysis. So making cybersecurity awareness, prevention, and security best practices a part of the culture, I think, is really, really a critical piece as well. Let me give a short promotion here, which is deserved of Certrec. So I think we're the only ones who have this. You can do a free CIP health check online if you do this particular URL down here. And this is the video that explains what happens. But that's another way to kind of understand where your gaps might be. Because if you went through this, of course, it needs to be somebody who understands NERC and CIP to some extent and what your utility is doing regarding that. Otherwise, you'll get the wrong answers and you'll get the wrong kind of health check answer. So that's another example of what can be done, solutions to consider. So I want to go, I want to be very tactical again and give you some examples. So on the phishing side, which is a really, really important area to protect against, there are some things that can be done tactically, right? I'm getting very tactical here, but I want to give you real examples. For example, is the logo not quite right? Is the grammar off, or the punctuation is not right? Is the spelling poor? Did they include a link or an attachment? Did they ask for sensitive information? Are the links genuine, or do they come with hidden links? Are the emails using a company domain? Legitimate companies don't request sensitive information via email. They have links that match legitimate URLs, no hidden hyperlinks. They don't send unsolicited attachments, right? They don't force you to their website. They also know how to spell most of the time, and they know grammar and punctuation. Okay, so this gives you some idea, tactical as well as strategic, I think, of what's happening out there and how to protect against it. Here are some resources, and these are various third-party sources, a video on why one big tech wants you to ditch your password, worth to watch. Why MFA, Okta has written a white paper on this. How to address cybersecurity in the energy sector. So McKinsey has written a really nice paper on that. We have written a paper on cybersecurity for utilities, and we have also written a paper on NERC CIP and the importance of critical infrastructure protection. If anyone has not yet had a chance to look at the ICS CERT, so Industrial Control System Cyber Emergency Response Team information, please go and have a look. It'll give you a list of all the kinds of things that to watch out for. And so I'm just about on time here. I need to go to my last slide here. So in conclusion, cyber threats are on the rise. You need to be informed, and you need to implement some simple measures to really reduce your risk of being attacked. And you need to expect the unexpected, and you need to plan aggressively. The whole key here is prevent damage to the facility, to the bulk electric supply, by reducing the chances of any kind of a breach. Okay, so I hope that that was informative, and we're open for questions right now. I will look for questions in chat. I don't see any questions yet. Brandon, are you seeing any questions? Do we have any questions? Okay, so there's a question. What would you say are the top action items to start taking today? The top action items. I think the first one is to understand the cybersecurity plan that you have today. Where is the plan? Look through the plan, and then do an analysis of potential gaps. You could even use this presentation. I know it's not super detailed, but you could even use something like this and say, hey, let's look at Mars. Are we covered with the 4 areas that that Certrec mentioned? And if you are not covered well, for example, the merging of IT and OT networks, the remote access part of it, the authentication part of it, and also the update of IT software updates, etc., then you have a problem. So gap analysis would be one. Another good one, maybe possibly to do, is just to go onto the NERC CIP health check that Certrec has on his website and just check it out. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I guess I don't see any other questions. All right, well, let's go back to the slides here, and thank you everybody for watching. Oh, one more question is coming. Okay, so 1 second here, let me find it. So one more question. Oh, thank you. Time well spent. Okay, not really a question, but thank you for that. Appreciate it. So that's the last slide. We thank you for your time. And if you want to get a copy of the presentation, please send us an email, marketing@certrec.com, and hope to see you again soon.